Well, we'll take a look at a few wetland species here at Eddyville Sand Dunes. When you're in a sand dune area, quite often there's wetlands that develop in the lower lying areas, the depressions within the landscape. The extreme porosity of the sand, of course, allows a lot of water movement down through that sand. And if there's some kind of more impermeable layer deeper in the landscape, down in the base of the sand or someplace in the sand, that'll help to make water collect in basins. And we have a little swale here that's a nice little wetland. We can look at a couple species here, maybe actually 3 species. I see another one out there we can take a look at. We'll start with the really predominant one. As you're looking through the wetland, you see all these green sword-shaped leaves. We're looking at sweet flag here. Sweet flag is Acorus is the genus. There's 2 species in Iowa, Acorus calamus and Acorus americana. This is calamus. This is the one that's probably the most common, and it's distinguished by the one major prominent vein that you can see here, this kind of ridge right through the leaf here that's a little bit off center. Americanus, it would have 2 other lateral veins, or veins closer to the margin of the leaf, that would be visible in addition to the central vein. Now, distinguishing calamus and americanus is important because for a long time calamus was thought to be a native species in Iowa and North America, but it's been determined that it's not. So all of the populations of Acorus calamus that we have represent non-native species in Iowa. Americanus is the native species. Sweet flag was often used, extensively used by Native Americans, so there's some thought that Native Americans moved sweet flag around and probably helped to promote the spread of the non-native species. So again, you can see a characteristic in this smaller plant here in stem, the very flat leaves. These leaves aren't quite as large as these, of course, but the very flat leaves. And they have kind of an iris-like characteristic here as the edges of the leaves kind of join or face each other here when we get down here towards the base. I didn't see any inflorescences, unfortunately, in here anywhere. Sweet flag has a spadix. If you remember looking at Jack or Jill in the Pulpit, that was the first webinar back there in May. This is in a different family, it's in its own family, Acoracea, but it has a similar kind of flower structure, a thick spike, spadix, and real small, tiny little flowers that are packed into that thick column. Alright, this is sweet flag, and another thing you can use to help identify this is just to smell it. Crush the leaves a little bit and smell it. It has a very pleasant, very sweet smelling scent to it. Hence the name sweet flag. Alright, then the next one we're going to take a look at is one we have seen before. We saw water smartweed out in the Davis wetland in western Iowa, but it was vegetative. We didn't have any flowers. Here's a nice example of a water smartweed. Persicaria amphibium looks like when it's in flower. It is pretty distinctive from most of the other smartweeds because it has just a couple of very compact inflorescences up here. A dense spike of flowers here, and then another smaller spike of flowers right here. They are rose-colored. Some other Persicarias are rose-colored as well, but the other ones would have an inflorescence that's more elongate, and the flowers are much more spread out. This one is very compact. And some of them, other ones will also have flowers coming from the lower portion of the plant, coming from the axils of these leaves down here. Water smartweed always has the inflorescences right at the very top, right at the very tip. So again, water smartweed, Persicaria amphibia. All right, here's another smartweed, also commonly found this time of year in wetlands. This is called dotted smartweed, or Persicaria punctatum. And the way you kind of sort the smartweeds out is, one of the first thing you're going to do is look at the structure here called the ochrea. The ochrea is a sheath-like structure that begins at the node and extends up the node, up the stem a little ways. It just is a kind of a membranous little sheath that, again, just kind of wraps around the lower portion of this node here between the two nodes. The ochrea is important because to separate the smartweeds into a couple groups, we look at that ochrea and we look at the top of it. In this one, if you had a hand lens, you could see this. You would see that the top of the ochrea has some bristles coming off the top of it. Other species will have an ochrea that does not have any of those bristles, and that would be an important way to separate them into a couple groups. Since this one has some bristles on it, and actually I can kind of see them here even without my hand lens, we're going to then look at the flowers up here. And the flowers are still kind of closed a little bit there. They're not quite open. But the sepals, or tepals as we would call these, because the sepals and the petals are similar here. Look at those tepals. And again, with a hand lens, you can look at those, and I can see that they have little dots on them. Those are little glands. Those little dots are little glands. So then I know that it's one of two species, basically. And the next thing I'm going to do is see if I can find a fruit in one of these. And the fruits of smartweeds are little achenes. There's one coming out right there. That dark, shiny thing right there. That's a little achene, a single-seeded fruit. And when I look at that real close, I'm going to note that that thing is really shiny. It doesn't really have any roughness to its texture, to its surface. It looks very shiny and smooth. And that is what tells me then that this is Persicaria punctata, the dotted smartweed. This one is found in lots of wet soil types of habitats. I see it a lot in wetlands such as this, in the margins of wetlands. See it a lot in floodplain forests, in the sort of the lower swales and damper soils in a floodplain forest. So again, it's a real common smartweed species. Yeah, we're now in I guess what I would call a bit of a sedge meadow area here at Eddyville Dunes. It's a lower swale area where moisture runs into this area and then moves sort of down slope, down the landscape. So it is definitely a wet area. It's not real wet right now. Nothing's very wet right now, but we do certainly see some species that are typically found in wet soils right here. Let's start with this grass right here, because this is all around us here. It kind of has, you might say, sort of a bushy top, sort of. A lot of leaves all clumped together towards the top right here. This is a real important species, common species in sedge meadows or wet swales. This is blue joint, Calamagrostis canadensis. There's nothing, well, here's one that has a very old inflorescence right here. There's not much left to it. So again, we're seeing it certainly after its prime here. It is a cool season grass, so it's more identifiable certainly, and has active flowers much earlier in the growing season. But blue joint, Calamagrostis canadensis, very dominant species down through this wet swale here. Then a couple over here that are forbs. Let's go with the ground nut here first. You can see the very attractive spikes here, or racemes. I guess they're racemes. The flowers have little stalks on them. So a cluster of flowers here, kind of distinctive in their shape and form here. This is Apios americana, groundnut. It is a vine. So remember, we use the term vine to describe a herbaceous climbing plant. Looking to see if this one has, yeah, it has, looks like it might have some tendrils here. These are structures to help it scramble and climb up onto the surrounding vegetation. The leaves are usually with 5 leaflets, as you can see here. I think you can find some sometimes with 3. And here's, no, this one's got 5. Here's one that's got 3. But yeah, 3 or often 5 leaflets. They're very broadly ovate. It's a little bit of a, I would say maybe a little bit of a ruderal species. Some places it might be a little bit weedy-like. Not overly populous right here anyway. Then another one right here as well, right next to it here, is this species, which is again another good wet meadow, sedge meadow, wet swale kind of species. This is grass leaf goldenrod. So like the other goldenrods, very small, tiny little inflorescences here, the head inflorescence. Each one of these little tiny little things is a head inflorescence, and each of those then has some little florets on it. And here's one that's a little bit more open. You can see that there are some ray flowers, very tiny ray flowers, and there are a few disc flowers. So again, both ray and disc flowers are going to be on these goldenrods. This one is distinctive with the very narrow, slender leaves here, and one way to make sure is to look at the leaf, and you can kind of maybe even see it without my hand lens, but there's 3 veins. There's a large central vein, and there's very, very distinctively 2 lateral veins. There's a vein on each side of the central vein, about halfway between the mid vein and the edge of the leaf. Those 3 distinctive veins are again a good characteristic for grass leaf goldenrod. This is Solidago, excuse me, it is Euthymia graminifolia. There's another great wetland species. It's an ironweed, western ironweed. This is Vernonia fasciculata. So the ironweeds, several species in Iowa, distinctive with their dark purple disc florets. Again, this just has some disc florets, doesn't have any ray florets. And among the ironweeds, western ironweed, which again is the one that grows in more damp soils, has by far the most slender leaf. This very narrowly long lancelet leaf. Another characteristic of it is, if you turn it over on the ventral side, look at it again with a hand lens, we see that there aren't any hairs. The other ironweeds, like Baldwin's ironweed and Missouri ironweed, would have some hairs on the undersurface. This does not have hairs. It's glabrous, the term we use for that. And it also should have, I think, some little dots or little glands, little punctate little glands, little dots, which I can see. Western ironweed, Vernonia fasciculata. This is a nice clump here. All right, here's another wetland species. We just moved up the swale a little bit here, and here's the species of Stachys. Stachys is the genus. The common name here is hedge nettle or woundwort. A couple different common names for this genus. So this one, there's several species in Iowa, and there's been a taxonomic revision, so to speak, of this genus. And so some things have changed relative to what you would find in the checklist of Eilers and Russa. The way I'm going to go about identifying this one is to start by looking at the stems and noting that, you probably can maybe see it here, but there's hairs on all parts of the stem. On this is in the mint family, so it's got a square stem. You see how it's square there. And the faces, as well as the corners, all portions of the stem have little hairs on them. That would separate it from a couple other species that only have hairs just on the corners. This one has them on all parts, and so the next thing we're going to look at is that the leaves are basically sessile here. There's no petiole to speak of there at all. Again, the leaf is attached pretty much right at the base there. Maybe just a tiny short little petiole on some of these, but not much of a petiole. And then I'm also going to note that the hairs on the stem are retrorse. Retrorse is a term meaning that the hairs are curved downward and pointing down the stem. They're pretty sharply pointing down. That would be in contrast with another species, Sticky spilosa, that has the hairs just more spreading. The hairs would come out more just straight out. That's termed spreading if they're coming out just more straight. Some might be slightly up or slightly down, but there's more variation in kind of how those hairs come out, but they're more or less perpendicular coming off of the stem. And again in this case, they're not. They're recurved, pointing down the stem. So this is a species now that's been a new species that's not listed in Eilers and Russa. It's a new species in so much as it's just a new species taxonomically. It was separated from another species as a subspecies. We call this one now, it's called Stachys aurencula, is the scientific name. And I think the common name, one of the common names used for this is, let's see if it's hairy hedge nettle, I believe. Hairy hedge nettle or hispid hedge nettle. The hedge nettles are in the mint family, and we don't have any flowers left, but the flowers all occur up towards the top of the plant here. They are good, nice, characteristic sort of mint-looking flowers. They have two lips, an upper lip and a lower lip. All we're seeing now here are the calyces, or the calyx that's left. The petals are gone, and looks like even the fruits are even gone now. The fruits have come out of those calyces. So it's all done. It's dispersed its fruits already. Stachys aurencula. All right, here is another wetland species that we often see flowering in late summer, early fall, end of season species. This one is a Bidens, B-I-D-E-N-S, Bidens species. Burr marigold is one of the common names for it. So the Bidens are characterized by, we can't see them yet, but are somewhat characterized by the fruits or the achenes that they make, and those fruits or achenes have very sharp little pointed barbs on the top of them, which are used to disperse the seed. Those little achenes with those sharp little barbs will stick into your clothing, but they're not quite that far yet, so we don't have those. We've just got the flowers here. And again, you can see it's in the Asteraceae family, and it has the radial type inflorescence, big ray flowers around the perimeter of a group of disc flowers right in the center there. So the Bidens are usually not too difficult to figure out or key out. This one is kind of distinctive because it's got such large ray flowers, for one thing. A few of the Bidens species don't have very well developed ray flowers. In fact, some of them, the ray flowers are very small or missing. This one's not the case. This one's got a very large, showy ray flowers. And then the leaves, which are opposite on Bidens. In this case, the leaves are compound or at least deeply divided, as you can see here. And I think that this reddish stem is another characteristic that is somewhat useful for this species. This is Bidens polylepis. Bidens polylepis. And I think one of the common names for this might be showy burr marigold. The flowers, among the Bidens, these are fairly showy flowers. Bidens polylepis. Okay, we're going to do one more here before we call it a day. It's getting past 6:30 here. And I wanted to do this one because as we're kind of walking out of the swell, I noticed it, and this is a, currently at least, listed as a special concern species in Iowa. This is a species of rush, Juncus. Juncus are characterized by having round stems. They usually don't have, well, they usually have at least some leaves. This one doesn't really have any leaves, it just has some basal sheaths down here. Usually there are, on some other species, there are a few leaves at the lower part of the plant. They have sort of regular flowers, except that the petals and the sepals are similar in their form and shape and color, so they're called tepals. But they make they have 3 sepals and 3 petals, so they have 6 tepals, and they make little capsules for little fruits. This is all the flowering portions here. They're all done here. The thing that you can use to really identify this species, which is Juncus effusus. Juncus effusus, I think common name is soft rush, perhaps. Is that, again, it doesn't really have any leaves. It just has sheaths without the blades down here. And when you look up here, where the flowers were, and now the remains of the fruits, we see that it appears that this cluster is coming off the side of a shoot, some ways down from the tip. That's what it appears to be. So most of the Juncus are going to have the flowers and the fruits are going to be right up here at the very top. Essentially what's going on here is that this is a stiff bract. So in other species, the bract would be bent down like this. It'd be lax, it'd be flexible, it'd be loose like this, and so the inflorescence would be at the very top, because again, the inflorescence bract is just a structure that sits below the inflorescence. But again, in this species, because this inflorescence bract is stiff like this, it makes it look like, though it's not the case, but it makes it look like this is all one stem, that this is just a continuation of the stem. But again, that's sort of a false impression. But anyway, either way, what you do is you recognize again that it looks like, at least the way the inflorescence bract is so stiff, it looks like the inflorescence is coming off laterally some distance below the actual top of the plant. Juncus effusus, soft rush, I believe it's listed as a special concern species in the state.